Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories today. Beirut southern suburbs spend another day under intense Israeli shelling. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says 28 healthcare workers were killed during the course of the last 24 hours in Lebanon. Meanwhile, in the south of the country, Hezbollah fighters and Israeli forces continue to exchange fire, following on from the stalling of the ground incursion. And as tensions rise, Iran renews its stern message to Israel, warning once again against any acts of aggression. Welcome. The World Health Organization says 28 healthcare workers have been killed in Lebanon during the course of the last 24 hours. This comes as at least 9 people were killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes targeting central areas of Beirut. Well, the Israel Defense Forces have advised residents in several areas to evacuate in southern Lebanon as fighting continues there between Hezbollah fighters and Israeli forces. Well, this escalation follows Hezbollah's announcement that they detonated a bomb targeting Israeli troops trying to enter the village of Marun al-Ras, which is in southern Lebanon. Well, developments are moving fast. Let's get the latest from Beirut, from the Economist's Middle East correspondent, Gareth Browne. We can also bring from Tel Aviv our correspondent, Trent into the conversation. Gareth, let me start by asking you first, what is the situation in Beirut tonight? I mean, it seems that several areas of the country have come under attack. What's the latest?
Well, as you say, I think it's a fast developing situation, not just in the south, but also here in the capital. I think in the last 24 hours, we've seen a couple of really significant incidents. We saw a strike on a medical facility just 500 meters away from the Prime Minister's office here in Beirut, in an area called Bashariya, in which at least 9 medical workers were killed. And then early this afternoon, we saw an airstrike on a Red Cross convoy in the south, and 1 Lebanese soldier was killed in that, and several medics were also wounded. We also had another incident involving an Israeli attack on a Lebanese army base in the south, which killed another Lebanese soldier. So, you know, more than 24 medical workers killed and 2 Lebanese armed forces soldiers killed. And that's before we even look, you know, at the really fierce fighting that is going on now between the IDF and Hezbollah along that southern border. So these are important developments. They're signs that other actors are getting dragged into this war, and signs of the broadening, the deepening, the widening of this conflict.
I mean, it makes it sound, Gareth, from what you're saying, as though really nowhere feels safe. I'd like you to, pick up on that. And I'd also want to ask you, are you managing to find what you need? I mean, are you finding shelves are still stocking food and basic essentials there in Beirut, given the situation the country's in?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is Lebanon has a remarkable capacity to keep the wheels turning. And I'll be honest, despite everything I've said here, I'm in West Beirut and it feels perfectly safe. I mean, the sound of airstrikes has become very common. And there's lots of displaced people on the streets, but the cafes are still open, the supermarkets are still open. I think critically, the airport is still functioning, and that is the artery to the outside world. And I speak to medical professionals who are really worried we might see a repeat of 2006, when one of the first big things Israel did was bomb the airport. They took out this key bit of infrastructure. So that would make it difficult not only to get supplies, food, whatever in, but also medical supplies, emergency stuff. And then you have to consider people who want to evacuate. So, I mean, this is a historical sort of cliche, but it's the reality. Life goes on in Lebanon, in Beirut, for a lot of people. I mean, everyone is glued to the news. Everyone is watching what's going on in the south along the southern border. And when those airstrikes are audible, the city sort of freezes for a moment and everyone wonders what's happened now. But then they go back to their daily work. And I think it's to, the Lebanese people's credit that they're able to sort of sustain this sense of normality despite this war seemingly getting worse by the hour.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Do stay with us, Gareth. I'd like to bring Trent into the conversation. Trent, it's all eyes on Israel and how it responds to what happened on Tuesday. I mean, 2 people sustained minor injuries. Very little damage was inflicted, as you were telling us last night. Is there definitely an appetite, would you say, on the part of Israel to respond to what happened?
Yeah, well, Tom, I think on one hand, the Israelis are pointing to the fact that no Israeli citizens were killed in that attack and saying that it was ineffective and defeated because of the Iron Dome air defence system and the support of the US. But also, I think they think it comes down to the civil preparedness and training of the cell phone alerts and the bomb shelters which are scattered throughout the country. But then they are also saying that a response is absolutely necessary. I think when you speak to a lot of Israelis here, regardless of their political views or personal position on Benjamin Netanyahu, there is a similar sentiment which connects many people, which is they do just genuinely feel that they are a small nation in the middle of a pretty tough neighbourhood, and that they need to show strength in order to establish their deterrence again. And so I think for that reason, there is a pretty wide expectation and probably, I would say, a majority of support for some sort of response from the government here in the IDF to what Iran did on Tuesday night. I think in many ways we're becoming numb to the news of what's happening in this region, certainly since October 7th. But it was absolutely unprecedented what occurred. 181 ballistic missiles being fired directly from Iran. And you know, that really, I think, is a moment where you're seeing these 2, Middle East heavyweights being closer than they've ever been before from the brink of war. And so I think from the Israeli perspective, they really do believe that they do need to respond, but also they are aware that that response will likely garner yet more retaliation from Tehran.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there'll be counterattack after counterattack, and it just spirals from there, doesn't it? I mean, Washington's made some of its red lines known, shall we say. But Trent, what are Israel's options? What are people saying about what Israel might do by way of a response?
Well, look, the public discussion here, both from political figures and also within the media, is that there's sort of a list of options that they are running through. Now, one is looking at potentially targeting the nuclear facilities of Iran. That's certainly considered the strongest action that they could take, but also the one with most risk. And of course, we heard President Biden say there yesterday that the US would not be in support of that. Another option, which we understand is being closely looked at, is targeting their oil and gas infrastructure, of course, so vital for Iran's economy, given that it is strapped by sanctions. In fact, we just heard President Biden earlier today, remarkably, as reporters in the US yelled out to him, would you support Israel hitting oil infrastructure in Iran? His response was, we are discussing it. I mean, seemingly confirming that this option is indeed on the table. We are also hearing several Gulf states hearing that have now tried to relay to Iran that they are neutral in all of this amid fears that if Iran's oil is hit, then they may seek to try and hit some of the Gulf states in order to try and disrupt global oil supplies. Other options, of course, include hitting Iran's air defence system or military infrastructure, but effectively all of them do genuinely carry the risk of a pretty severe response from Tehran, which clearly feels that it's been humiliated in some way, I think, certainly in chapters of the IRGC, by the fact that even throughout these 2 major missile barrages that we've seen now, there's not been significant damage in Israel. So, look, it is, I think, a pretty testing time right now, and many people here, and I think probably in bordering nations, are holding their breath at this point.
Gareth, let me go back to you in Beirut, because we've heard on a number of occasions Israel saying to the people of Lebanon, our war isn't with you, it's with Hezbollah. And I'm just wondering how that goes down with people in Lebanon. And are they even hearing that message? Is that message even broadcast or relayed to them?
Not going down very well is the short answer to that question. I think the Lebanese have a long and clear memory of the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon. The 15 years Israel occupied huge parts of the south of this country. A small village on the border, Khiam. Every Lebanese knows the name of that village because it's where dissidents were held and tortured by Israel's proxies in Lebanon. And, I don't think that message is breaking through. I'm not sure how concerned the IDF would be at, people listening to that or not. Okay, it's one thing to say it, but to actually mean it is something different. I think this plays into a big risk of Israel's ground invasion now. We saw this phenomenally successful and efficient air campaign, over the last 2 weeks or so. And as they move into this invasion, even, they say that it's only a limited incursion, it's only going to go a few kilometers, perhaps dealing with the border villages. I think many people are quite skeptical of that in Lebanon. But the concern is that ground invasion, it's in fact a completely different war. And it's one that not only plays to Hezbollah's strengths, but it also galvanizes Lebanon against Israel. And even in communities that, have a lot of criticism of Hezbollah, have spoken out publicly about Hezbollah's role in dragging the country into this war with Israel following the October 7th attacks last year. There's this tendency that, this is all forgotten. I think the Lebanese are quite a proud people. And as much as they don't like, the role that Hezbollah plays or Hezbollah's dominance of the state, I think many hate even more the idea or the notion of parts of their country being occupied by Israel. So I think the risk is if this invasion, deepens, if it broadens, if it goes further, if we start to see mission creep, you're not just going to see Hezbollah fighting against the Israelis. You're going to see other communities, other militant groups getting involved, and the potential it's sort of in some regards unifies what is a very divided country in one sense at least, and that is repelling the invasion.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed to the Economist's Middle East correspondent, Gareth. Browne. Also, thanks to our Tel Aviv correspondent, Trent. Thanks, both of you, for that. Well, let's bring into the conversation now the former British ambassador to the United Nations and former UK special representative for Iraq between the years 2006-2009, Sir Jeremy Greenstock. Great to have you with us. We were just talking there about Israel's next possible steps. President Biden has said nothing's going to happen today, but that's about the only certainty we've got at this stage, isn't it, with regards to what Israel's possible reaction might be?
It's certainly extremely uncertain, and I think that Israel and the United States have different considerations, different motivations, different views of what should be done. So this is obviously still under consideration at the moment. We don't know what's going to happen.
A lot of people telling this channel, they think that Israel's got tactics, but they don't have a strategy. Does that ring true to you?
It does, because you can't go on fighting forever. At some point, there has to be some kind of stop, some kind of settlement, ideally, some kind of peace, ideally. And I see no Israeli political strategy or aim as to where this should come out. Will they be occupying Gaza and the West Bank? Will they be permanently occupying southern Lebanon? Will they come to terms with their Arab neighbors? Will they be at half-war, continued conflict with their Arab neighbors? I think we need, in this conversation, to analyze a bit what some longer-term Israeli ambitions might be, which have not been declared. Because the short-term aim of Israel seems to be to make their deterrence against Hezbollah, against Iran, against Hamas, so punitive that they never strike Israel again. But that has to go on being renewed and renewed. If you're using shock and awe and terror to do that, it's not a political settlement. It's not a political end in that. What do they want in their final relationship with Iran? How keen are they to ensure that Iran never reaches nuclear weapon status? What is the final aim of their holding their domination of the Palestinian territories? Do they want to own them? Do they want to hand them back? Do they want to have an agreement with the Palestinians on a stable future? All of this is up in the air. And I think we need to be quite cautious with our eyes open as to what the Israelis are really planning to do in the longer term.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few hints in what Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, said earlier on this week when he talked about how change in Iran might come about sooner than people might have expected. And we've been hearing about a great sense of alarm in Tehran, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in hiding, this sense that Israel has infiltrated Hezbollah to the extent that it has done. Perhaps it's done the same with the Iranian apparatus. Do you think perhaps more than working out what future relations with Iran might look like, Israel might have something much bigger in mind, namely some sort of a change of regime? Do you think that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu was getting at?
Well, he might have been sketching that out as an aim, but Israel cannot do that on their own. And it would be, I think, an overweening aim to think that Israel could change the political situation inside Iran. He may have been referring to making things so difficult for the regime, the leadership in Tehran, that the people rise up against them, but he didn't say that explicitly. I think he's just trying to say, Israel is coming for you, you'd better look out and dial down your response, because we will respond to anything you throw at us. I think this is to some extent scare tactics.
I'd like to get your take on the progress and the approach of Western diplomats in trying to broker some sort of a solution to this whole crisis. Because here we are, even with regards to, for example, Gaza, there hasn't been a ceasefire agreement since November of last year. I mean, all this diplomacy and seemingly very little to show for it. Why do you think this is the case?
Because Israel doesn't want a settlement, because Israel doesn't want any movement towards a Palestinian state, because Israel won't take up the conditions for normalization with Saudi Arabia, which Riyadh has stipulated should include a move towards a Palestinian state, because Israel feels that unless it shows its continuous military dominance, it won't succeed in Benjamin Netanyahu's political program. And so the plain answer is Israel doesn't want it and doesn't have to listen to diplomats proposing an early peaceful solution. That's quite a hard approach and is dismissive of the concerns of the civilians in Gaza and West Bank in Lebanon that have been caught up in this. So I think that's the plain, straight reason.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Former British Ambassador to the UN, Sir Jeremy Greenstock. Thank you. Well, let's get some more analysis on what's happening on the ground and the military dimension to this conflict. We can speak to the former British military officer, Colonel Richard Kemp. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Colonel. Southern Lebanon is surely where, we've known for a long time Hezbollah has a major advantage over Israeli ground forces. And we've seen in the last 24 hours that Israeli soldiers have been killed there in southern Lebanon. Do you think this ground incursion was a mistake on the part of the Israelis?
I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was a necessity because, of course, let's not forget that since the 8th of October, Hezbollah have been launching nearly 10,000 missiles into Israel, which has forced something like 65,000 Israelis to take refuge and leave their homes in northern Israel, heading south. And therefore, of course, that their homes, they have to regain their homes, and that can only be done by military force pushing Hezbollah back to the north, given that all diplomatic efforts by the French, the Americans, the British and others to try and get Hezbollah to voluntarily withdraw north have failed utterly.
I mean, some are saying that, perhaps I wasn't suggesting that Israel shouldn't have reacted to those rocket attacks from across the border, but it's just in terms of tactics, the aerial campaign, the targeted assassinations, Israel was showing that's what it was capable of doing effectively, and a ground incursion was inevitably going to result in high losses on their side.
Yeah, I mean, of course, any ground operation is much more dangerous because air operations, the Israelis in this region are largely invulnerable. Hezbollah doesn't have any significant air defense capability, but they do have capabilities on the ground. And so it's extremely dangerous. And I've no doubt whatsoever that the IDF would not have gone in on the ground if they could have dealt with it comprehensively from the air, but they haven't. And it's an unfortunate situation whereby the IDF have to put their own forces at great risk. But I would say that Hezbollah has been significantly degraded as a whole as a result of the decapitation of the organization by Israeli airstrikes and by the pager and radio explosive attacks that took place. So I think Hezbollah is weakened, but it is, and it was before this operation began, it was probably the strongest terrorist organization in the world. So yeah, very, very dangerous. But in my opinion, the IDF will be able to overcome that. They will be able to push Hezbollah north. I don't know how long it's going to take, and I don't know how many casualties are going to be incurred on either side, but I think it's an achievable objective for the IDF.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm told. Really great talking to you, though. Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let's get some analysis from Lebanon now. We can speak to the independent Lebanese MP for Saida, which is the third largest city in Lebanon, Dr. Abdulrahman Bizri. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. I'd like to pick up on something that you said at the end of August. You spoke to the Lebanese broadcaster LBCI, and you said that you saw the region heading towards a significant political settlement. What made you so sure this was a scenario that was likely to unfold? Because it sounds like you knew something then that we now are discovering for ourselves.
Well, first of all, good evening to you and to our audience. Well, you see, what was happening in the region, the major offensive and the retaliation and the size and the sheer mass of the military aggression that took place and the destruction was really a significant clue that we are heading for a new geopolitical settlement. We're probably what happened in Gaza, what's happening now in occupied Palestine, what's happening in Lebanon, all of these will not simply end by a sheer and mere ceasefire. This is probably, even if a ceasefire occurs, and we are all seeking a ceasefire, hopefully, yet the true conflict and what happened since October 7 until now, after 1 year of total destruction, of thousands of people dying, tens of thousands of people dying, Gaza almost completely wiped out. Lebanon is now being destroyed systematically. The Israeli army has been shrugged and shaken. Its superiority is being questioned, and so on. All of these will probably are clues that what happened cannot simply end with the ceasefire. We have to have what you call a new political settlement. We have to draw new lines. We have to have some sort of an agreement that needs definitely the international major powers, typically the United States, Europeans, our other allies, and definitely the Arabs to be involved in order to come out with a more solid situation that will sustain a peace for years to come.
I'd like to ask you, as a doctor, a medical doctor, which you are, you're also an independent MP, I'd like to ask you how the healthcare system there in Lebanon is holding up, given what I imagine is the enormous pressure it's been under these last 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, you see, the positive points about the health system in Lebanon is that it is private. So all of it, it's entrepreneurship, it's all private initiative. The system has been challenged several times before in the past. This is not the first time we are experiencing or we are sustaining military aggression against Lebanon from the Israeli forces. So we are used to war. We are used to probably manage mass casualties in a very efficient way. We have built our experience with that. Then this is why when casualties started increasing and we witnessed what happened with the beepers and the walkie-talkie explosions, the medical system, the health system reacted quickly, whether it's being hospitals, 90% of them are private, not public sector hospitals, emergency services, Red Cross and other NGO-related emergency services, they all reacted very efficiently. And we had the drills, we trained them before to do that, and they did them very well. Now, what is the negative aspect of it is that the country was and is still suffering from deep recession, from deep political rift, and from a deep economic depression. So this is why now there is no banking system in Lebanon. So everything that's being spent by hospital or dispensed by hospitals is dispensed directly from their pocket to the casualties. And unless the government will directly infuse money to these hospitals and these medical institutions, they will not be able to sustain themselves. And more importantly, the kind of casualties now we are witnessing are classical results of massive bombardment using projectiles and missiles that will probably inflict heavy casualty. It's different than what we have witnessed with the beepers and with the walkie-talkies. So now the healthcare system is burdened by a lot of casualties, but we are also burdened with a third dimensional problem, and this is very serious. We have a lot of displaced people inside Lebanon, internal displacement. Those people, many of them left their houses without their medical records. They have a lot of chronic problems to deal with. So now our problem is to handle those displaced, to give them the medical care they deserve. We don't want them to survive Israeli bombardment and yet die from a neglected chronic illness.
Yeah, Dr. Bizri, I wanted to ask you, I mean, as you say, more than 1 million people displaced. We've heard reports 300 people are sleeping on the floor of a famous nightclub in Beirut. I mean, just tell us closer to where you are in Saida, how your constituents are managing to get by. Are they finding enough to eat? We've heard this incredible coming together of Lebanese communities. Are you seeing that in evidence every day where you are?
Yeah, sure. This is one strong point of Lebanon. Despite our political disagreements and our political mosaic, we have a lot of rifts in Lebanon, but everybody has come together. We have a very active and very vivid and creative non-governmental organization and social community. So we all came together. In Saida, for example, we have at least 8,000 hosted in public schools, but we have around 12,000 hosted in apartments and in other places. We are trying to deliver care for them. You probably would imagine the burden of distributing somewhere around 20 to 25,000 hot meals a day, and trying to give them all the care they need, whether it's hygienic, whether it's feminine, whether it's for the elderly, whether it's for the children, and so on. Yet, as I told you before, we have probably built a very steep experience, and we did well even in harder times. So we hope that the coming together whether in my city, Saida, or in the neighboring community around my city, which we call the Greater Saida, where we probably, the numbers I was talking about, probably double the number of hosted people. We're trying to cope despite the fact that our assets and the reserves are very weak.
Okay, well, I'm so sorry to cut you short. We're going to have to leave it there. Independent Lebanese MP Dr. Abdurrahman Bizri, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Just before we leave you, a reminder of our top stories. Beirut southern suburbs spend another day under intense Israeli shelling. The World Health Organization, meanwhile, says that 28 healthcare workers were killed there during the course of the last 24 hours. In southern Lebanon, Hezbollah fighters and Israeli forces continue to exchange fire, following on from the stalling of the ground incursion. And as tensions rise, Iran renews its stern message to Israel, warning once again against any acts of aggression. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble's interview with Russia's Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Novak, and the former CIA Director, General David Petraeus. Plus, at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, do join me for Global News Today with our special guest, who is the Lebanese Minister for the Economy. Do stay tuned for that.